Come in. Once again, introducing Barbara Van Horssen from the Momentum Center. Really glad that Barbara could join us again. Last week she told us a little bit about the Momentum Center, and this week we're going to talk about the civil rights road trip that the Momentum Center sponsors. Larry and I did not go on this trip, but we have been to many of these sites. And so we're going to participate in the panel this morning as well. So Vicki Rumpsa, Betsy Snider, Patty Brink, all went on the road trip last year, along with Mark and Ann Sneller. Mark and Ann are not able to participate, although you're going to see them in the video. But Mark is running the bus, and Ann's in choir. So be aware that they went on this trip as well. And I'm sure they're happy to talk with you about it. And coming up in April, Larry and Cindy Terlau are going to go on this trip. So, yeah, we're very happy about that as well. Barbara's going to introduce everything, and panelists will respond to some of the questions from Barbara and also from all of you at the end as well. So thank you. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here again, and so glad that we've probably all made the adjustment from daylight savings. Last week was interesting. And this morning, I'm delighted to be here because I woke up in Grand Haven and everything was covered in snow, and I thought it might be kind of a miserable drive, but it wasn't. It's beautiful here. So glad to be here. By way of introduction, I am the experimenter at the Momentum Center, where we're creating a community where every person is fully visible and connected. And we do that by providing social and recreational opportunities for people with mental illness, addictions, and disabilities, but also by addressing the social determinants of mental health. And so we have community conversations, town hall meetings, and cultural immersion experiences, all in order to help people see the world from different perspectives and ultimately to see the lens through which they see the world. So we lead international trips to Honduras, Egypt, Kenya, China, Tibet, and Morocco. And we also have an Across the Bridge, which is a leadership exchange between the Tri-Cities and Muskegon to address the cultural and racial divide just across our drawbridge. And we lead the Civil Rights Road Trip. So on Monday, April 24th, 25 people, including several that Jude just mentioned, were on our trip, both on the panel and not here today, for what is really a transformational experience. This is not a vacation, and it's not a mission trip. It's really about being immersed in another way of living and being. So it went a little bit like this.
Started out foggy.
The Civil Rights Road Trip is a valuable investment for any organization that has made a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is experiential learning that has the potential for significant change. Participants will develop an awareness of how preconceived ideas influence perceptions that unintentionally reduce productivity.
Before departing, the group shares what they are leaving behind.
I just want to leave behind just like school, everything, so I can give my focus to this.
I'm leaving behind school, work.
Leaving behind the schedule and pressures of the day.
Preconceived notions, preconceived ideas.
I think I'm trying to leave behind some prejudices.
I'm leaving behind preconceptions and expectations, but also assumptions about what I have to learn.
Intellectually, I knew that Alabama was the site of all these confrontations. It just feels very immersive and real being here.
I'm experiencing a lot of like raw feelings, and just I want to take that and know how to move forward. I think there's a lot of mixed emotions because a lot, believe it or not, a lot of those things are still happening today.
History isn't It's not even over.
Coming down here is sort of the capper for the first part of the journey, where it is the discovery and the re-education and the understanding that things are not as I thought they were. I am not as I thought I was. This will inform my next step of how do I engage in allyship and fighting racism at home. It's not here, it's everywhere.
I'm still trying to sort out my own identity. I was 48 years old when I found out my mother was mixed race and had been passing for white because she was taught to do that. It was a matter of safety for her family because they were able to. And I think how sad that they had to hide who they truly were in order to be safe.
All they've asked for is to be treated decently and to have their rights.
If we bring awareness to it, we won't commit the same mistakes.
What if I get called for jury duty? How can this prepare me for doing that work?
Understanding our history increases empathy and understanding. And the cultural curiosity inspired by the Civil Rights Road Trip is transferable to all cultural and societal differences.
Here we are at the famous Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is really great site of big change in America.
Being denied the right to vote and having to fight for that right to vote is why they walked across the bridge, knowing full well that they would be beaten by state troopers.
And then you go across the bridge, and your body feels it and knows it in a different way.
They were ready for that because of that perseverance, and it's sad to see that all that happened just for basic human rights. We walked across that bridge safe and sound to see history. They walked across that bridge beaten to make history.
The determination of the people who had to fight for this simple thing of voting.
But the passion and the leadership in the country coming together, black and white. I personally, growing up in that era, remember just, being glued to the TV.
I am, because we are, because Selma was. The history and the pride, in a way, of this is who we are, and we deserve life.
They don't seem to hear us. And I thought, I guess that's what I'm here for. You can learn as much as you want, but if you don't really hear, it's not going to sink in.
It's more visual and physical.
All the echoes of this trip will just keep on going in my life.
You can read books, you can listen, watch documentaries, but when you get your whole body involved, it's a different kind of understanding.
The sense of connectedness is human connectedness, not just knowing something from the book.
We've persevered, there's been progress.
I mean, look how long and hard they fought because of the martyrdom, really, of those girls and the people who died. The focus became on change.
Staff at the Momentum Center are available after the trip to facilitate dialogue between participants, leadership, and other employees in order to help participants translate their experience into action in the workplace.
This idea of a dream that, why is that so unreasonable that it's still 60 years later you're being judged by the color of your skin? It really helps when you're in a group that you can experience it and express it.
Hopefully become more aware and more alert. Hopefully I can use this as a jumping off place to be a little more productive in a quest to be a good human being.
I knew there were lynchings, but I had no idea there were so many.
Just being more aware the way different people are treated. But I'm going to be more conscious of visually checking people and trying to understand where they're coming from and being more willing to speak to them.
Slowing down and absorbing helps.
So I'm just hoping that my day-to-day experiences will be different because of this.
Helping to talk to people who are not in the same space that we are.
Ultimately, employees and employers can convert the knowledge they gain into tangible outcomes to create a more diverse and productive workplace. To find out more about the Civil Rights Road Trip, visit our website, momentumcentergh.org. So, I'm thrilled to be joined by friends today and parishioners here who experienced the Civil Rights Road Trip, including Patty Brink and Vicki Rumpsa and Betsy Snider, and Jane and Larry Schuyler, who, as Jane was explaining, weren't on this specific trip, but have had many of the same experiences, and even more so. And I'm excited to hear everybody's reflections this morning. So I'm going to arrange our sharing today in terms of the 4 pillars: body, mind, shadow, and spirit. We start with the body, the physical shell that we all inhabit. I can tell you that I have wanted to visit the Legacy Museum since it first opened as the Lynching Museum. And that was the reason I was so excited about this particular trip. And I believe it was a much richer experience for having been in a community experiencing that rather than just heading over there with my husband. So my first question to the rest of you is simply, why did you decide to take your body on this trip?
Hello? Oh, wow, okay. It starts when I'm 8 years old. I was interested in politics way back then. Watched the news with my dad. It was the 60s. So right away, I was kind of asking a lot of questions. My dad currently was working in the public school system in Muskegon. He would definitely have told me about the disparities that he observed in that community. So that perked my interest, but also a lot of questions. Like I said, as soon as I was able to read more rather than absorb it from family, Uncle Tom's Cabin. I remember reading that and saying, oh my gosh, I need to know more. This is terrible. And so picked up books about black slave narratives, James Baldwin, Rosa Parks. Then later on in my life, The Root Story, you probably remember the TV, we were all glued to that. Another thing than just reading it, it was experiencing it on TV. Moving on to another part of my life, I became a mom raising children in Forest Hills, the East Grand Rapids type of atmosphere. All white, all middle class or upper middle class. And I go, how can I pass on my knowledge so my kids understand that not everybody lives like this? That's when I shared with my kids that they needed to read books by Alex Kotlowitz and Jonathan Kozol. Excellent books. We shared those together and talked about them because they express what it's like growing up in the inner city. There's even one that comes closer to home. You may have heard of The Other Side. It's about Benton Harbor and St. Joseph. I said, kids, that's right down the road. You might not see it here. So that affected my life. So here's my journey, and I go on and I go, I need to know more, Lord, and I need to do something about this. Then the busy life of, being a mom, being married and all that. But I kept reading and reading and reading. And finally, this opportunity came where I said, I want to experience this. I want to know more. This hurts. And so this opportunity for this trip came. Prior to the trip, Barb basically encouraged us to do a lot of reading. I read John Lewis. I read all about Martin Luther King. But the book that really got me was Just Mercy, because I knew we were going to visit the museum that Brian Stevenson, basically was the person that originated this whole idea. So that's really why I go on it. My gosh, it's a culmination of 60 years of reading, wanting to do something, but wanting to know more. And walking in the footsteps of the same people was, it's just a whole nother deeper experience. So anyway, that's why.
I think we would have been friends in high school. 2 reasons I went. One was I signed up for this trip. I had only lived in Holland 4 months. I knew I had something very hard I had to do at the 1st of April. And I thought I needed something to jog me out of this wallowing that could happen. And so I thought, this is what I prescribed for myself. Get out of town with this group and change your view of things. I had a similar experience, though, growing up with, it was Eyes on the Prize, that series from PBS in 1987, 14 parts that I watched while I was ironing. I could iron on Saturdays and hog the TV. And I bought the book then, and then I taught it to 10-year-olds, and it just set me off on this course where I will never understand this completely, but I've got to try.
Well, I didn't learn very much about slavery in school at all. And even in college, I just was a bit oblivious to the whole civil rights movement. In 2017, when I was in Wisconsin, our book group read Just Mercy, and Brian Stevenson that you mentioned, and I just decided I am going to go to that museum. It's such a quality place. It's like Smithsonian, I would say. And I knew about Southern Poverty Law Center, but I really didn't know before that about Equal Justice Initiative that he is the originator of. So, and I've been reading for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years a lot of books about race. And so I was going to drive down there by myself and just spend as much time as I wanted at that one museum. And then when I moved here in 2019, I heard about the Momentum Center and the opportunity to join the group. So that's why I went.
We found our body in these locations due to APSE, which is the Association of Partners in Christian Education. They have an annual conference at different cities, and one that got us down south was held in Little Rock, Arkansas, where we went to the high school that took the federal troops to integrate. And then, actually, following that, we went down to Glen Shores, and driving through Alabama, we decided we should get on the Civil Rights Trail. And so we spent time in Montgomery and Selma and Birmingham. And then a couple years later, APSE was held in Birmingham, and they did a focus on the Civil Rights Trail. So we had another chance to visit these sites. When I was in high school, which was in the late 60s, it was a troublesome time. Remember being in study hall, and suddenly a mob came into this room, a study hall with 300 people in it. A mob came into this room. Our high school had all kinds of large windows. All the windows went up, and everybody went out of the room. I was at lunch, and a mob came in to the lunchroom. And we went out the window again, and my friend behind me, and behind him came a chair. This was high school. When Martin Luther King was shot, we had police marching in the halls and the smell of mace. We were locked in classrooms. I'm saying that because we went to the high school in Little Rock and walked into the school, and it was pretty much the same as the high school that I attended. And I was amazed that 50 years later, I felt this kind of trauma of being in that place once again. So it was a good learning experience, and it's a national park. The school is an active school, the grounds are a national park, and that's an interesting place. And so we can also talk more about the Civil Rights Trail, but I'm going to let Jane talk about that.
Now you can know I'm 2 years older than Larry, so I didn't have the same high school experience, even though we went to the same high school. It was very different when I was there. That happened 2 years later. But I took my body, probably why we take our bodies anywhere, to experience that place. And experience it with all of the senses that are available to me. And there is something about standing in the 16th Street Baptist Church and looking at the display that have the articles of what's left of the 4 little girls who were murdered there, seeing her shoe, etc., and having an 8-9-year-old black child in front of you stand there and look at the same display and go, this should not be. And it's like, amen. Yes, this should not be. There's something about that you don't experience anyplace else unless you take your body there.
Thank you all. We're next going to talk about our mind, the way we piece things together and organize our thoughts and learn. One of the things that I was most struck by and grateful for were seeing the names of people who had been lynched, to at least provide the dignity of naming these people who otherwise have been forgotten to history. And so I'm wondering what each of you learned on this journey that you'd like to share.
Okay. Using the word mind, it's also being reminded of the things that happened in these places. That's why I made the handout today that are kind of scattered around in the chairs of the events that took place in these cities. It's abbreviated, but I thought it would give you a reminder of the various events that happened in Montgomery and Birmingham and some of the cities, Selma, the places that we have been or went to. And yet I didn't want to use too much paper, so I also included the map of the official U.S. Civil Rights Trail. If you go to the civilrightstrail.com.org there that I put on there, it's a wonderful site. It's the U.S. Civil Rights Trail is an official trail for the national parks. And so, yeah, you could see more about it there. Learned a lot. And I am a lifelong learner, so I continue learning. But 2 of the things that probably impact me upon these trips were listening to Bernard Lafayette. We've heard Bernard speak twice. And Bernard, his college roommate was John Lewis, and John Lewis really got Bernard involved in all of this. And Bernard was a freedom rider with John Lewis and rode with John Lewis, and he was also the organizer in Selma working toward the voting rights. And then also listening to Elizabeth Eckford, who was one of the Little Rock Nine, the 9 students who integrated the high school in Little Rock. And we were actually able to listen to her last public speech in Little Rock. The public in Little Rock was also invited to listen to her because she had announced this was the last time. She just couldn't do it anymore. But 2 things about them. Bernard sang for us both times the songs that they would sing in the jail. And he spent time in the Parchment Penitentiary, which is one of the worst places to be. And he told us about, they would sing, "The buses are a-comin', oh yeah, buses are a-comin', oh yeah." And they would sing that to the jailers. Because that was a part of the strategy, was to fill up the jails. And the jailers would get angry. So then they would sing, because the jailers would threaten to take their mattresses and toothbrushes away from them if they didn't stop. So they would sing, "You can take our mattress, oh yeah. You can take our mattress, oh yeah." And then the jailers, of course, would take their mattresses and toothbrushes. So then they would sing, "I'll keep my freedom, oh yeah. I'll keep my freedom." So he sang for us the various freedom songs that they sang and told us about. They also used their time in the jails to teach the others the nonviolent strategies, which they were all learning from James Lawson, of course, who's still at Vanderbilt University and still teaching nonviolent strategies. So they would use that time for teaching as well as singing. And Elizabeth Eckford taught us some of the things that that the Little Rock Nine did in order to protect themselves, because the military wasn't all that helpful in really protecting them, and they didn't protect them inside the school at all. So they walked along the lockers quickly. They didn't pause between classes. They walked quickly, and they walked next to the lockers, because if they were out in the middle of the hall, of course, they'd be shoved up against the lockers. So they would walk quickly next to the lockers so that they couldn't be pushed into them. She would put straight pins in her books, sticking out from the side of her books, because of course they would grab their books and shove their books and throw their books. So she put stick pins all around the edges of her books to try and prevent them from doing things with her books. And so all the various strategies that they tried to use, they still got attacked in the bathrooms, etc. And still to this day, even when Elizabeth did speak, they ask no one to applaud. She cannot tolerate crowds. She cannot tolerate loud noises. So no applause. It's just please wave your hands at the end. Just everybody wave their hands. So it's very impactful to hear the stories and the things that actually happened to them.
I'm just going to highlight 2 items of many. The march from Selma to Montgomery was sobering, in that it's further than what I imagined in my mind. So Selma is pretty much directly west from Montgomery. It's a little over 50 miles, so driving that takes the better part of an hour just to drive this. And they walked this. Not only they had to walk it, but they're walking through farmlands of folks who were not sympathizers. And so even finding where they could spend the night, because it took several days to get there, was its own feat. And so I was impressed with that walk. Also, starting that walk, going over the Pettus Bridge it's interesting from Selma, you see the bridge, but you can't see what's on the other side. And so as Bloody Sunday came, those folks were coming over and they couldn't actually see what was there until they were already there. And that you can see from just being on that bridge. So the walk itself, walking for voting and going to the state capitol, which is also interesting that Martin Luther King's, the church that he pastored, is kind of at the foot, the base of the state capitol. That's an interesting in juxtapositioning as well. Second item is in Birmingham at the 16th Street Baptist Church, where the 4 young girls died with the explosion that was there. The church was gifted, and I forget from who, I think it was like Sweden or something. Yeah, thank you, of this stained glass window with a black Jesus outstretched. What a theological statement. It was interesting that they couldn't put that window in there for several years because they were afraid it would just result in another bombing of the church. But as you go on the trip, be sure and notice that window. What a wonderful theological statement of victory.
I learned a lot. Each museum or site that we visited had history, and I always want to read everything, so I'm the last one in the group. I needed more time at each place. I was reminded of the power of photography, how incredibly important it is to document life, the good and the bad, and the photos everywhere in each place affected me so much. The lynchings and family separations were the two things that I'd like to accent. Executions, electric chairs, being tortured, being burned, and being killed. The dates and the reasons were given on columns. And I'll just read from this book. A black man was lynched in Millersburg, Ohio in 1892 for standing around in a white neighborhood. Arthur St. Clair, a minister, was lynched in Hernando County, Florida in 1877 for performing the wedding of a black man and a white woman. David Walker, his wife, and their 4 children were lynched in Hickman, Kentucky in 1908 after Mr. Walker was accused of using inappropriate language with a white woman. I mean, to think 4 children were lynched. I have also in my notes children that were lynched that were up as low as 6 years old, and 15 and 13 and 11 and 10. And because I like to read everything, and we couldn't take pictures in the Legacy Museum, so it just tortured me because I wanted to photograph everything. So in the family separations, young children that were taken from their parents, and some of them did not know where they went. Some mothers were whipped, and one mother, speaking of separation, had 7 children. There were also ads to sell people. At a 10 and 11-year-old, they talk about how strong they are and they would be a good worker. Such a violation of human dignity. It's just hard for me to understand the hatred and the violence and the sexual exploitation. It was a cabin for sex, apparently. And this was all tolerated by government officials.
I'm just going to tell you about one thing that I learned out of many. Ed Johnson. My discovery of Ed Johnson started with this book. I like to go to the library and look at the new nonfiction books. And I pulled this out a couple of months before I went on the Civil Rights Road trip. And towards the back is the discussion of Ed Johnson. Ed Johnson was a black man who was lynched in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And when you read about him, as he was lynched, he said, "I am an innocent man. God bless you all," to the mob of thousands. And that echoed so much Jesus on the cross. "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And it just haunted me and haunted me. And so I knew I was going to the Legacy Museum and the memorial, and I thought, I'm going to leave the museum and I'm going to walk by myself and just find Ed Johnson. And I walked through town and I got there by myself, and it's not easy to find a name. They don't have any books or any labels that way. I knew it was Hamilton County and I knew it was Tennessee. And I had to go around, and finally I did find him. And I just sat with him for a while. And this is what I wrote in my journal when I was all alone. I wrote, "Alone, I know one name among all these 4,400 names over the years, and not personally, Ed Johnson from Hamilton County, Tennessee. It was not easy, but I found him, and I'm sitting under his memorial now. Why? Because he was an innocent man who did not deserve to die, let alone die so violently. I just want to be still and honor his memory. Wouldn't he be surprised that some aging white woman he never knew came to speak his name and try to honor his memory 117 years after the lynching in Chattanooga? His final words have haunted me. God bless them all. It takes so very long and so much effort to right entrenched wrongs. I do not think Ed Johnson is done with me. There's a memorial to him in Chattanooga, and I think he's still working in my life."
Like our first question said, why did we go? And we kind of heard about my background. It ended up being on my bucket list. I had to. But being there took my knowledge, my body, and connected that to my heart. I think that's the biggest thing that happens there. You can read all you want to. We can't experience it literally. But being there and walking through the museums and reading about the people just brings it so real. I'll give you just a couple examples. The gal on our trip who had, in her ancestry, found out that one of her relatives was biracial. I don't remember her last name, but I don't remember it now, but at the time I did, and I was really affected by her story. So when we got to the Legacy Museum and walked through all those cement bricks, I want to call them, they're just huge, columns and columns with people's names who had been lynched, what county, what date. Sometimes they didn't even know the name, so the name would be blank. I looked for her last name and I found it. I found a distant relative of hers and went to find her and said, come here, I found your name. You talk about having an experience that went from, the mind to the heart to reality. anyway, it was similar to what you just talked about, what you experienced. But here was someone on our trip doing that. And then another thing that affected me greatly was, if you see this picture, these are big glass jars. In there is soil. It is soil that is from the places where people were lynched. And so their names are written on there and the location. And again, not everybody's name was known, so sometimes you find a no name. But anyway, there was just a wall of hundreds of these jars. And you talk about bringing it body, mind, heart experience. Yeah, I think you understand. Thanks.
I want to mention, it was named that there's 4,400 individuals that are recognized at the Legacy Museum for having been a victim of a terror lynching. Those are only the people for whom there are at least 2 documented pieces of evidence for those lynchings. So it's just the cap of the iceberg in terms of the emotional, terrorized lynchings that happened. And Vicki, great transition to our next pillar, which is shadow, which deals with our inner workings, our emotions, our motivations, and our relationships. We talk about mind first because in the West, we typically have to think things through before we allow it into our heart. And so personally, my reflection, shadow-wise on all of this, is how I continue to feel more and more convicted to continuing this work, because I know as a white female, I don't have to. That life could get actually quite easier for me if I decided to just subtract myself from the equation, particularly in our relatively hostile environment right now toward social justice. And for those reasons, I can't decide that I'm just too tired or frustrated and give up, that I can never stop this work. And now I wonder about the rest of you, having experienced what you did, how have you been changed? Yeah.
I'm definitely a better person for doing this. And better means more is expected of me, I think. And more thought needs to be given to, you know, every day, every prayer, every experience that I choose to take part in. Because I've had it so easy and so many have had it so hard, that I don't think personally, I've reached the point where I can just relax and say, well, my life is pretty good and I can pray for you, but that's about all I can do. I think there's more. I basically feel challenged. I don't have an answer to that challenge yet, but it's sure it sure keeps me thinking, and yeah, I think that's so. The shadow is hanging over me in a good way, because there's a reason I'm on this earth, and there's a reason I went on this trip, and there's a reason I am called to do something for somebody or for some. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's ... at the end. Please, Lord, show me the way.
I think I'm a little more optimistic. So much of this understanding has been a solo journey, and I'm finding my tribe, and they're showing up, and it's getting bigger, and so it's given me optimism.
Well, we were told that we would be pushed to be genuinely uncomfortable on this trip, and we were. we had a daily reflection in the morning and then also in the evening, and we shared our feelings from the day. And that was good to do, Barbara. I feel like I'm much more sensitive as I meet people. I try to, people of color or minorities, I try to look them in the eye and smile and say hello and greet them. And I guess I didn't think about that before. I'm more aware of how white privilege has affected my life, and I have felt very sad and angry about inequities and the abuse and public policies that we need to change.
For me, I have a better understanding of the history that I experienced in my life, and also what I was seeing as a child on TV. I understand better people's frustration and why they needed to see change. But also for today, I find that I understood because of this even better why I'm a member of this church, which is, to act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God.
Indeed. I had the privilege, I should have said, of growing up in an integrated school in the 50s and in an integrated home. And so my environment was different, I've learned, from a lot of other people. I didn't know that at the time. And I didn't know about all of these things happening in the South, necessarily in the 50s when I was in elementary school either. But I would say the body needs fuel. And so these experiences continue to fuel me as I commit and recommit to diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'll work really hard to make sure that that happens in all places for all people.
Which is another good segue, because our last pillar is spirit, the light or consciousness that resides in all of us that allows us to know that we are connected and interdependent, and that this work doesn't matter if we don't do anything about it, right? All of these experiences don't result, if they don't result in work, what's the point, right? Spirit offers the challenge to convert our change into action. So my final question is, what will you do now, and how can others join in this important work? And then we'll take some questions. So, let me keep it here for right now. How are you converting that change to action?
I will continue to admire and respect the perseverance and the resilience and the determination and the people who don't give up hope of the African Americans after these years and years of inhumane treatment. I have been, since the trip, speaking up more about inequality and racist policies and white supremacy. Two things I can do at my age is support Southern Poverty Law Center and Equal Justice Initiative by sending money, and I'll continue with that. We've done that for probably 10 years at least, and help out, support the Community Action House and Gateway and people who are poor. I have an African American, a mixed race great-grandson, and he is 8 now, and I think he's just starting to become aware of some racial issues. He is absolutely adorable, and he loves to learn, and I hope that when he gets to be older, we can take a road trip. And just keep learning and reading.
Well, when I started this trip, I had no idea that a year later I would be a grandmother for the first time in July, and the baby's going to be a boy, and the baby will be seen as black. Never saw that coming, really. And so I'm asking you, the question was, how can you join me? This baby will be growing up here in Holland, Michigan. I've only lived here less than 2 years. Can you please help me make this a safe place? Can you keep caring any way you can? I worry about the first time he comes home from school being called burnt toast, or worse yet, the N-word. You know, when is that going to happen, and how is that going to be? But that's what I'd like to close with today. Just please help make this a safe place for this little baby.
Picked up this magazine while I was down there, and the statement says, "Don't just cross the bridge, be the bridge." I think that's a great statement to kind of keep with you. Thinking about what I can do, and I start with family. And when I was down there, I picked up books for my grandchildren. I have, don't be too alerted here, 16 grandchildren, of which quite a few are, well, 4 are black, and I've got 5 more from Burma, adopted. And so I picked up these books down there, and they're about the civil rights. And I know they're taught it at school, and they're definitely taught it at home. But I wanted them to know that Grandma Vicki wants them to understand not only about the civil rights time, but just about the world that they are being brought up in. And I happened to save this little note that I wrote him. I said, Grandma Vicki just got back from the civil rights tour, where I visited a lot of places mentioned in the book I'm giving you. I bought this for you to read because I feel that it's important for you to know about the civil rights movement. I grew up in the 60s, which was the time of protests, sit-ins, boycotts. Ever since then, I've made fighting discrimination an important part of my life, and I hope you do too. As you live each day, find ways to treat others as you would want to be treated. Be helpful to those in need. Grow in awareness and knowledge of our world. Fight injustice where you see it. And let your light shine in darkness, and be faithful to God. So that's one way that I hope to pass it on. It's to the next generation. Personally, another way I've been changed and want to make a difference is as director of Kids Hope for our church, I make sure that Black History Month is celebrated and supported by a lot of not only books, but activities they can do so that mentor and child is talking about that. That's just another influence on these kids. Attending Juneteenth. I've made a commitment once I moved to Holland and found out I'll be there, and I will support those businesses. And I take that a step farther. I try to do, when I do business with minority businesses locally. And finally, what I'm hoping, reparations. I'm just hoping that churches could find a way to get behind the movement, because we don't just owe these people, Black people, those that we discriminate against and lynch, we don't just owe them thoughts and prayers. We owe them more. We promise them more. And the disparity is caused by a lack of, wealth, background wealth that's passed on. That we have our mortgages, we have our IRAs, whatever. That's what they're lacking to get ahead. So anyway, the future is ahead of us, and be the bridge. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Okay. So, and I just wanted to mention, a lot of people mention a lot of good books, so you can read books. There's a lot of good movies out, and you can experience the Civil Rights Road Trip yourself. So please let me know if you're interested in that. And we'll go to questions.
Get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. You know, that's John Lewis. And Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
Does anybody have questions for anyone on the panel?
And we're reminded that we're broadcasting live and this is being recorded.
I have a question about the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Maybe you made reference to this earlier, I don't know, I was a few minutes late. But if I'm not mistaken, Edmund Pettus was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm wondering why, you know, almost 60 years after the Selma to Montgomery march, that bridge still bears his name. I mean, we're living in a time when statues of Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and other heroes of the antebellum South are coming down. The Edmund Pettus Bridge still has his name on it. Why?
I'll take the first answer to that one. It is a real debate in Selma, particularly as where we were there. We had a guide when we were in Selma, and he was talking about that. And the debate is, yes, we should get rid of the name because it's part of the Ku Klux Klan. The other part of that is, this is our history, and we need to recognize our history so we don't repeat it. So that's the quick answer to your question. This is obviously a longer answer, but that's a debate that is heading right now. It's so it's not just there because it's there. At this point, it's right there intentionally, and they're still having that discussion of what's the best thing to do.
They are talking, one of the recommendations is to add Foot Soldier Bridge underneath. So it's both Edmund Pettus and the Foot Soldiers Bridge, but yeah, that's real controversy right now. And Freedom Bridge too, yep.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Leif Van Horst. I'm Barb's husband.
He wasn't here when we started, or I would have
sorry,
said that.
I couldn't find the church. But I've gone on the trip twice now, and I'm going to go again and everything. And one of the reasons I do go is every emotion in your body comes out when you visit these museums and you visit the sites we see. I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything comes out. It's just that powerful, and that's why. And I've gone twice, and I'll go again, and I'll learn more. The other thing I think that is really important is we go down on a bus, and the bond we form with everybody that's on the bus, because the talks prior in the morning and then at night, the reflections and whatnot, they're so powerful because we can all see the same thing, but we all have a different lens that we see that in, and it helps to interpret it even more. So even though you've seen it in the day, you've got your interpretation, you pick up on everybody else's interpretation of what they saw, and that just enhances it that much more. And again, the bond you form, you know, it's really lasting. I mean, what you get together for.
So we've celebrated DEI initiatives here, and Jane mentioned it at the end, and you did at the beginning. But nationally, DEI initiatives are under a lot of assault now. So the state of Florida and Texas are eliminating DEI positions from universities. Setting aside our county board of commissioners, what's the state of DEI supportive programming in business, industry, and education in our part of the country?
I think one of the things that that I've been very disappointed with in our very local economy is the lack of voices around supporting DEI right now. I think people are trying to just fly under the radar and not draw the attention and the ire of leadership that's opposed to DEI. I think there's still people who are concerned and want to invest there, and we're trying to find language that isn't immediately polarizing or inflammatory. The most innocuous of terms now have been taken to mean things that they don't. And so I think we're trying to find the vocabulary to make sure that the important work continues without the overlay of misrepresentation and just outright falsehoods about what DEI is. When you hear people talk, I mean, we're being criticized, the Momentum Center, our work in racism, we're being told is creating division, which of course is exactly the opposite of what dealing with diversity is all about. And so continuing, I think it was Betsy who talked about the need to know we're not alone and to continue building the tribe and having the conversations, because I do think there's a larger majority of us who care about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. And the other voices can be very noisy and tend to drown that out. So we need to continue talking to each other, talking to our neighbors, talking to the people we work with and have relationships with, and continue to build that strength of coalition and find new language to enter into relationships with people. I said this last week, I don't believe anything changes except relationally. So we have to figure out how to continue conversations with people that we don't necessarily agree with.
Here comes the hammer.
Yeah, I can see my husband is telling me it's it's past time.
Too?
So,
can I have a quote quick?
Yes, please.
Okay. So
Yep.
my closing reflection is from 1946. When Margaret Halsey said, one of the less dismaying aspects of race relations in the United States is that their improvement is not the matter of a few people having a great deal of courage. It is a matter of a great many people having just a little courage. So I ask us all to have acts of courage.
Amen. Yes, indeed. And I would remind you that next Sunday, we are having our Racial Justice Commitment for Hope Church discussion during our Pizza Sunday next week. So I encourage you to participate in that as well. Statements are available, of course, online at the Hope Church website, but also at the Welcome Center if you need that. But I'll remind you that that's taking place. And also starting next week is a 3-week or 3-session. It will happen first session next week, then of course no classes on Easter. And then for the 2 Sundays following Easter, Stephanie Pangborn is going to be talking about the easing the dis-ease of dementia. So please think about that as well, and we hope to see you all come back. Thank you very much.
Jane, just a quick note. Tim Pennings has a comment.
A quick announcement while you're all here. Andrew it was that went and got Simon Peter's brother and said, you got to meet this guy with similar enthusiasm if you can make it to the Men and Boys Choir this afternoon at 3 o'clock at St. Adelbert's. That's the huge cathedral that you see from the interstate in Grand Rapids. You can find it. It's the Grand Rapids Men and Boys Choir. Our concert last night, there were tears and just exclamations of wonder and praise coming out of that thing. It was just all beautiful Easter music. So that's, if you don't make it, you won't know what you missed. But if you make it, you'll be thanking me for it. 3 o'clock at St. Adelbert's this afternoon.